Any delegation that goes to Kyiv this day from another part of the world always has to have a peace plan with it, and the African leaders who are there today and going to Moscow tomorrow, of course, have got a peace plan. These African leaders are not particularly representative of the 55 members of the African Union, and they have rather taken the Russian view of the war. They accept President Putin's narrative on what this war is all about. So it's good for Ukraine that these people have gone to Kiev first. It gives Zelensky a chance to show his side of the picture and see if he can shift their perceptions a little bit. When they go tomorrow to see President Putin in Moscow, of course, they'll be talking about this peace plan they've got, but really the agenda they will have is to try to persuade President Putin not to duck out of the grain deal, the really important grain deal, which helps get grain onto the world markets. Last year, it was almost a catastrophe in terms of world food prices and food insecurity. And it'll be worse this year if the grain deal, which is at present hanging by a thread, is not renewed. Now, I suspect that although there's not much in this in terms of concessions from Ukraine or the West in continuing the grain deal, I think President Putin may well continue the grain deal because he's playing a bigger game with African politics and politicians. The Russians are heavily involved in the civil war in Libya. They're heavily involved in the civil war in Sudan. They have been very heavily involved in diamond-rich Central African Republic. There are already about 1,500 Wagner fighters in the Central African Republic, as well as in Mali and in Libya and in Sudan. But the 1,500 fighters there have been there for quite some time. And the Central African Republic are offering the Russians a military base there for between 5,000 and 10,000 troops. So President Putin is playing a very big game in Africa, trying to bring Africa on board, not just for resources and military cooperation and trade, but also to get their backing for his version of what the war is all about. He sees the war as part of a shift in global politics, and he wants Africa on board. We'll see how successful he is at doing that at the United Nations General Assembly, I would imagine, in September when the big meeting, the big international meeting takes place, and we'll just see how much backing the Russians still have in other parts of the world. It's been quite high so far. Meanwhile, in the rest of the war, it goes on. This is the 478th day of the offensive, of the war itself, the Russian offensive, and the 12th day of the Ukrainian offensive. And it's going on in three areas, in Bakhmut, in Velika Novosilka, and at Orikhiv towards Tokmak. Not very much has happened in those areas so far over the last couple of days because neither side has yet committed their main forces. They're both probing, both feeling each other out. The Russians have not done it all badly. They've been very competent so far, but the Ukrainians haven't yet committed most of their big forces. That's something we will see in the next week or two, I would imagine, but not quite yet.